Hello Whisky fans, and welcome back to another day on our Whisky Advent Calendar. I did forget to mention at the end of the previous video where I had placed the Balvenie 14-year-old Caribbean cask on the leaderboard. I've put that just up here in 4th place between the Aerolite Lindsay and the Darkness 18-year-old. I'll probably have to see if I can type this up and put this in the comments or on the description of the video in future. I am interested to hear though, if you're following along at home with your Whisky Advent calendars, what are your favourites so far and how's your leaderboard looking? Hopefully we can go and add another one to the top half of the leaderboard today. Let's see what we've got on day 10. What have we got? Green Isle, from the makers of the Character of Islay Whisky Company, blended Scotch whisky, 40%. So Green Isle is one that I have heard of before, and I've heard a lot of good things about it. A little bit surprised to see that it is bottled at 40%, because I really have heard good things. But you never know, we might be surprised. Let's give it the obligatory sniff from the bottle. Ooh. That's really quite peaty. Much more peaty than I expected from a 40% blended Scotch. That smells pretty nice. There's definitely some youth there though. So as a blended Scotch, this is going to be at least one single malt from the Isle of Islay and at least one grain whisky, which it doesn't actually call this an Islay whisky. It just implies it because it's from the makers of the Character of Islay Whisky Company. So from that, what can you actually infer? I suppose they'd be legally entitled to put whatever whisky they want in here, because they're not actually saying that it's Islay, at least not on the label of this miniature. So it's probably pretty safe to say that there's at least one single malt from Islay and grain whisky, which is almost certainly not from Islay. But being a blended Scotch of unstated origin, that's what they're allowed to do. So that nose, that slightly malty, fairly young and youthful, slightly bready and starchy, damp oak nose reminds me a little bit of some peated Bunnahabhain. There's quite a pepperiness on the nose as well, some peppery oak. And the peat that you're getting on this one, it's a particularly dirty peat, so it's more of a mineral, fusel, chemically, slightly fumy, petrochemical exhaust fumes sort of note. I wouldn't say it's a particular medicinal note to the peat. It's more of a burnt, fumy, industrial note. So the nose on this one, it's young, it's okay. There's some interesting flavours in there, but it's not really anything to write home about. Let's see how it tastes. I was probably a little bit optimistic with this one, expecting to be surprised like we have with like the Aerolite Lindsay, which was much better than I expected. This one is a little bit worse than I expected, if I'm honest. On the palate, it really does taste quite blendy. So by blendy I mean that it's a rather indistinct vanilla coconut grain whisky type flavour, an almost bland neutral grain whisky type experience. Also on the palate, there is some peat to the palate, to be fair, but the main feeling that I'm getting from the palate on this one is that it is a blend and not a particularly expensive blend, I would guess, from the palate. But there is some peat there, and the peat, as we saw on the nose, it's more of a dirty, oily, fumy sort of peat, so something a little bit more industrial, and also some notes of smoked ham on the palate as well. As for the finish, it's very, very short, pretty weak, with some notes of that acrid smoked ham and lots of those rather neutral grain whisky notes. So not a huge fan of this one, to be honest. It's not a bad whisky, not really, but it's, unless it's really cheap, it's not really something that I would say I would buy. Yeah, more and more as time goes on, I'm smelling quite a harsher, mature note on the nose. I'll just try the palate again. Really is surprising that for such a peaty whiskey, because it's got a fair amount of peat to it, this one, especially for a blend, that you're immediately met with that rush of really bland, neutral grain spirit, sort of neutral, spirity, vodka-y notes. It's really the first thing that hits you, and the peat comes in slightly behind that. I did say that I'm not going to be giving grades on these whiskies because I'm just doing these from the little 30ml samples from the advent calendar, but this is in solid C territory for me, so as I said, it's not bad, but it's not great either. So what space can we find on the leaderboard for the Green Isle blended Scotch? So it's definitely not going to be in the top half. I'm thinking somewhere around the Magmura, Benriach, Teeling possibly. I think I would probably go just below the Benriach. There we go. I would just like to do a little bit of research and find out exactly what this Green Isle mystery blended Scotch actually is. Okay, so of course it is a Master of Malt product. I completely missed that one. It is from the Character of Islay Whisky Company, which we know is the company behind the Aerolite Lindsay, which is Master of Malt, isn't it? So this one's also a Master of Malt product. It's £30 a bottle, so it's kind of a upper mid-price blend. So it's not too expensive. And also, like I said, that just the way that the label reads, it hints that it's not all from Islay, because it does say from the makers of the Character of Islay Whisky Company rather than Islay blended Scotch. And I'm just reading here that it features a core of Islay malt alongside Speyside malt and lowland grain. Now, I don't think anyone really produces grain whisky on Islay, so come to think of it, I don't think that you could have a 100% Islay blended Scotch. It would have to have some mainland grain whisky in it. But there we have it, Green Isle blended Scotch whisky. Really interested to see what other people thought of this one, because I really have heard quite a lot of good things about this. Certainly nothing negative, but me personally, it's an okay whisky, but really doesn't blow your socks off. But let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree, and I look forward to hearing from you. Cheers.